ESPN's Buster Olney with Armen and Levack. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. Buster, yesterday you were talking about Yogi Berra all day long. Great story about him at ESPN.com. Tell us your best Yogi story.
I think just for me personally, it was just being around him and seeing his effect on people. And, you know, when he would walk into a clubhouse, he was 5'7" when he played. He probably wasn't that big as he got older. And, you know, I was thinking to myself as I was watching him interact with players that, you know, besides guys who knew him well, like a Derek Jeter, like a Paul O'Neill, a lot of the other players may not have understood just how great a player he was. And, you know, he was never going to be the one who was going to tell them, look, I served on D-Day. I was part of the invasion in June 6, 1944. He wasn't going to be the one to tell them, you know, I got more hits than anybody else in the history of the World Series. I won more World Series than any other player. I finished in the top 4 in the MVP voting for 7 straight years. And, you know, he tended to, I bet, probably knew more about the players that he spoke with in the clubhouse, about them, than they did about him. And he was so current, guys, in his understanding and his knowledge of players, you know, because he was a very avid baseball fan. He watched games all the time. And the last conversation I had in person with him was actually about what a great hitter Victor Martinez is. And, you know, and that's not necessarily a common thing, but it said a lot about Yogi, about how much he loved baseball, but I also thought, you know, said a lot about how humble he was, that when he would walk into a room, he didn't need to be the star.
I guess for me as a fan and a fan of the Yankees, obviously, my biggest blessing in all of this is that the bad blood between Yogi and the Yankees was put away long before he passed. I think that was a huge thing for me as a Yankees fan.
It was a huge thing. Now, I tend to believe after talking with Yogi and getting to know him that I think it was less about, you know, Yogi wanting to make amends with George Steinbrenner personally because of his relationship with George. I think it was more about creating a dynamic where his family could go to Yankee Stadium and sharing that experience with him. And I think that's ultimately the reason why he did it. Now, however they got to that point, bottom line is Yogi was at Yankee Stadium a lot, and I always thought it was interesting that George, who was so superstitious, actually looked at Yogi as being like a good luck charm. And so whenever there was like a big game, from what I understand, George would, you know, his assistant would make the call out to Yogi and say, look, we need you to come in and throw out the first pitch. We need you to come in and be part of the ceremonies. Because Yogi had won so much. I mean, you know, Yogi, his entire life, it always seemed like everything worked out great for him. And I think George wanted some of Yogi to rub off on those teams.
Wow. R.I.P. Yogi Berra, and Buster Olney wrote a great piece on it as well at ESPN.com. Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team with ESPN's Buster Olney. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. And Buster, last night Girardi goes to the bullpen after Ivan Nova throws a great game, and the bullpen collapses. And we have criticized Girardi for the way he's used Betances and Miller. He goes to the bullpen last night, and they just absolutely implode. Buster, what is the proper way to use and win with the Yankees bullpen?
I actually think that, I mean, there were games in recent days where he went to the bullpen. For example, in the first game of the series against the Blue Jays, and he got, I think, 6 1/3 innings and 1 run out of the bullpen. I think that the last 6 days they learned some good things about the bullpen. Now, everything didn't go right, but I think that he probably learned that Caleb Cotham, generally speaking, is someone that he can have some trust for. I think that, you know, he's learning about, you know, other guys in that group that he can structure. I think that probably part of the reason why he took Nova out of the game last night with 2 outs in the 6th inning was the fact that he hadn't pitched in a while. And, you know, generally speaking, I tend to view what we've seen with the Yankees over the last 6 days as, you know, they went 3-3, but I think it's been a good time for them.
Can you put into words what Greg Bird has meant to the Yankees in Mark Teixeira's absence?
You know, I think he's now become one of the most important hitters in their lineup. And it was interesting talking with you know, the Mets people after the weekend series in which they got to see Greg Bird firsthand. I had one of them say to me, so this guy's going to be a star. and he talked about his command at the plate and his calm at bats, how no moment seems too big for him. And I loved the other night when Bird hit the 3-run homer, which was decisive on Tuesday night. When he hit the home run, I'm sure you guys will agree with me, it looked like it was something he'd done about 500 times in his career. He just kind of quietly dropped the bat and ran around the bases. And they really didn't react that much until he got back to the dugout, and that's when he went crazy. When I talked to Brian Cashman, the Yankees GM, about him last week, and I said, who does he remind you of? He brought up John Olerud, a player that I covered with the Mets in 1997, and I got a chance to talk to Greg over the weekend, and I don't think that they're necessarily similar and that John was more understated than Greg, but you definitely get a feel when you talk to Greg Bird about how much, he's very relaxed, and he has a high degree of confidence. I think we can already look ahead and say one of the more difficult decisions the Yankees are going to have next spring is if Mark Teixeira is healthy and Alex Rodriguez is healthy, and Teixeira is the first baseman and Alex Rodriguez the DH, then what do you do with Greg Bird? And I think there's a fair chance, if all that plays out, that Greg Bird, despite how great he's been this year, he could start next year in the minor leagues.
Wow, okay. That was going to be our follow-up was, what are the odds that he has to go to the minor leagues just by default?
All depends on whether or not Teixeira and A-Rod are healthy. Look, Mark Teixeira's got a no-trade clause. I can't imagine that in the last year of the contract that he has, and that's what next year is for him, that he would agree to waive his no-trade clause. And so I think the Yankees probably would look at it as, look, we got two really old guys who have a history of getting injuries. We might as well keep the depth. And that's what I think that sending Bird back, if A-Rod and if Teixeira are healthy, that is probably the safest call they can make.
Wow.
Buster, I'm watching that game last night, and Russell Martin, he's like the ghost that haunts the Yankees. They let him go. He's got 5 home runs against us this year, a handful of doubles. His OPS is great. What is up with Russell Martin? Does he have bad blood towards the Yankees? Why is he killing them?
No, he actually has a great relationship with the Yankees. It's interesting. Last Saturday, when I was talking to Alex Rodriguez about David Price, and he mentioned how in the last 5 or 6 starts, David Price has suddenly opened up the outer half of the strike zone by pounding the ball inside to right-handed hitters. And I said, do you think that's a Russell Martin influence? And Alex absolutely said, no question. Look, the Yankees and Russell Martin left each other on good terms because Russell Martin totally understands, and I know this from my conversations with him, the Yankees front office loved him. The coaching staff loved him. Girardi loved him. But if you guys remember, what happened was when Russell Martin became a free agent, that was the time when the Yankees were talking about getting their payroll under $185 million, and it was a big austerity push that eventually fell apart. And I know Russell understood that this was not about the Yankees saying, look, we don't like you, we're going to get another catcher. It was about the Yankees baseball ops people saying, we love you, but we just can't afford you.
Buster Olney, thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. Buster, Yankees and Major League Baseball are already selling tickets for that one-game wild card. It appears that's the direction the Yankees are headed against the Astros at this point. Are there any preparations that a team makes that the Yankees will be making at this point, being a potential week and a half away from that game?
Well, my guess is they're going to do what they need to do to line up Masahiro Tanaka to start that game. We know he missed yesterday's start because of the hamstring issue. And from what I understand, Tanaka was fighting the staff about missing that start last night, and he really wanted to make it. And the Yankees don't believe that his hamstring issue, the last I checked on it, is serious. And I was basically told that, look, if the wild card game was tonight, then he'd be able to pitch it. So I think that that's going to be their number one issue. I also think that in the next week, you're probably going to have a situation where Joe Girardi's got to figure out if he needs to do some tinkering with his lineup, whether it's putting Brett Gardner lower, putting Chase Headley lower, moving Carlos Beltran up, which is what I would do because, look, I think Carlos Beltran right now is on fire, and he really has been, their most consistent offensive player for the last 3.5, 4 months.
But bottom line, if you're a Yankee fan, start worrying about that wild card?
Well, I mean, at this point, the numbers tell you that it's a long shot to catch the Blue Jays. If the Yankees went in the final day of the season needing to win one game to win the division, then I bet you they would start Tanaka. But short of that, yeah, I think at this point you're planning because of where they stand in this behind the Blue Jays. You're preparing Tanaka to start the wild card game, and look, Armen, I understand you mentioned that the Astros right now would be the team they'd face. That thing is so wide open, it's ridiculous because all those teams are not playing well between the Twins and the Angels and the Astros, and it really comes down to which of those teams can win, 6 out of the next 10 or 7 out of the next 10, and because that's all it's going to take, one little burst of success, and one of those teams is going to win that spot.
Wow. We'll be keeping an eye on that. Meanwhile, we've been watching the Amazons, the Mets, Buster, 3-6 in this homestand that they just wrapped up. What are your concerns with the New York Mets right now?
Harvey. I don't think there's any question, that's the number one thing. I mean, let's face it, guys. What happened on Sunday night was like a dress rehearsal for the Yankees, for the Mets' worst nightmare. To have Harvey's innings limits come into play and have him leave a game in which, he was totally dominant, and then to have the team fall apart right after he left, all I could think of was, can you imagine if you're Matt Harvey and you, after your 5 innings, you retreat into the trainer's room, you're getting an ice pack on your shoulder, and over the next hour and a half, 2 hours, your teammates are getting blasted, and they lose 11-2, and veteran players on the team are being taken out of the game, and they're coming in the training room, all probably frustrated that they let that game get away. And what are the conversations with Matt Harvey? And I think that remains on the table going forward, because I bet you that if Matt Harvey went to the Mets today and said, you know what, I'm not going to worry about the innings limits, just pitch me as much as you want, the Mets would be like, absolutely, we're on board for that. And that feels like it's going to be the issue hanging over them. On the other, I think a lesser issue is they got to get Yoenis Cespedes going again, because clearly, he can be a difference-making player, and he's really been locked into a slump for a while now.
Yeah. Buster, when we heard that David Wright was coming back, we got mixed reactions from the fans. What's his role? How important is he to the Mets right now?
Well, he's certainly someone who's been through he's been through it, before, and you want that experience. I also think that whatever happens with Harvey, if the innings limits go to the side, I think David Wright will have had a lot to do with that. From what I understand, David Wright has been a really influential person this year behind the scenes. He was the one. Terry Collins told us a story the other day when the innings limits thing with Harvey popped up. David Wright went into his office and said, look, I want to talk to Harvey. And Terry Collins' attitude was, hey, you're the captain, go ahead. And as you guys know, they spent the next that day's game talking a lot in the dugout. And I think those are conversations that continue to go on now. And so it'll be very interesting if David Wright affects any sort of change with Matt Harvey. Look, is he going to ever be back to the same type of player that he was in the past? I don't think so. And he had a long conversation with our colleague Jessica Mendoza leading up the Sunday night game, in which he referenced a conversation he had with Don Mattingly about back problems. And after hearing the details of that, the fact that David Wright, for the Saturday game, guys, he arrived at the ballpark at 7:30 in the morning for a 1 o'clock game because he goes through 2 hours of treatment every day on his back. And when you hear stories like that, I think it's an open and fair question. You know what? Is he ever going to be a great player again? And I think the answer probably is no.
Wow. Great insight. Buster Olney, our insider with Armen and Levack on 104.5 The Team. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. And Buster, this Sunday in the National League, Pirates, Cubs, 2 other teams that are going to have a factor in this postseason, and a big game on Sunday between these two.
Yeah, because it is kind of a dry run for that one-game wild card. Jake Arrieta is going to be starting for the Cubs. It looks like he's going to be lined up to pitch against the Pirates on Sunday, although I wouldn't at all be surprised if there might be a change, because a lot of teams will want to hide a guy in that situation to not give an opponent one last look at him. But the Pirates are going to be left with a question. I think right now the Pirates are the best team in baseball. They're playing the best. They're so tough. I love the fact that when they clinched, 2 years ago they were going nuts and they were spraying each other with champagne and they're dogpiling. And last night when they clinched the playoff spot, they toasted each other with a glass of champagne. Something very different as the team goes through its evolution. But here's the thing. In order to advance in the postseason, they got to get through Jake Arrieta, who's only allowed 4 earned runs in his last 75 and a third innings. He's allowed 4 homers in 4 months. And I don't know if the Pirates will be able to solve that. And so what we're going to see on Sunday night could be an interesting precursor to what happens in October.
It looks like you got your wish for this Saturday, Buster, when the Giants play the A's.
Yeah, Barry Zito pitching against Tim Hudson in what probably, it sounds like it's going to be the last Major League appearance for both of these guys. These two former teammates starting against each other, and our colleague Mark Mulder is going to be throwing out the first pitch, it sounds like, for that game. So the big three all being honored in Oakland on Saturday. And this morning I had a conversation with Mark Mulder on our podcast, and I asked him, when you look back at those teams, the A's put together, where they had Eric Chavez and Miguel Tejada and, the big three on the staff, in your heart of hearts, do you believe that there were times when, despite the fact that you guys lost in the postseason, that you guys were the best team? And he said, absolutely. And he talked about, he can still, as if it was yesterday, remember Jeremy Giambi being thrown out at home plate. He looks back at those teams and he said, look, I'm not someone with regrets, but you look back and you think about those steps that they didn't take. But to me, there were definitely long periods of time, 2000, 2001, when that was the best team in baseball. It's cool to see those guys be honored on Saturday.
ESPN's Buster Olney every single week. He's stinking nails with Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. So, Buster, what I want to know is, how do you prepare for the postseason? So you got a week and a half left until you're about to say, hey, family, see you for Thanksgiving. You try to make sure to
planes, trains, and automobiles.
Yeah, but spend some time with the wife and the kids before you get out of there?
Oh, yeah, no question. My son's school was off. He's 11, and he was off yesterday, so absolutely. My daughter's in boarding school, and so, I can't see her anyway. But, yeah, we've been playing tennis this week, running around, having as much fun as we possibly can before we start October. And, of course, if the Yankees or the Mets are in it, that means I get to stay home, and that's a good thing.
Buster, are you athletic? You go hiking at Lake George, get some tennis in? It's impressive stuff, man.
Well, you know what? You don't become a sports nerd unless you're interested in it from a young age.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very true. Well,
Yeah.
I was, but in the 3rd grade, my parents said, you know what? You should probably go play the tuba. And that's what I ended up doing. So ESPN's Buster Olney. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. Buster, appreciate you, man. We'll do it again next week.
Okay, guys. Take care. Thanks.